Okay, so let's get started. Good afternoon. I am Dr. Mescaram Gabregzaber, Assistant Clinical Professor and Director of Inclusion and Community Engagement in the School of Human Evolution and Social Change at Arizona State University. I feel incredibly privileged to be able to provide timely and important programming, such as today's event, Colloquia, and want to thank all of you for joining us. Welcome to the second event of the semester in our colloquium series titled Toward a Liberatory Theory and Praxis, with our 14th colloquium to date. This monthly series aims to highlight the work of contemporary scholars belonging to identities and traditions marginalized within mainstream Western academia who, through their work, confront neo-colonial power structures and challenge long-standing norms of knowledge production. It was born out of a demand from our graduate students for exposure to more critical scholarship that is relevant to their lived experiences and the times in which we are living. Specifically, I want to thank Tisa Lowen, Elisa Haas, and Drs. Anais Roque and Nalubega Ross, who worked with me to conceptualize this series and to establish its parameters. I also want to thank all of the staff members and student workers who have and are helping behind the scenes to make this event happen. Nicole Pomerantz, Alice Casey, Danny Anderson, and Mohamed Rahman. I also want to acknowledge Chef's leadership for supporting and sponsoring this series, specifically our unit director, Dr. Chris Stojanowski. Before I introduce our speakers and facilitators for today, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. Please note that the first portion of this presentation is being recorded. As our speakers shift into a more interactive portion of this presentation, we will stop recording. Throughout today's event, however, you, the audience, will not be visible in the recording and all of the mics will be turned off. However, the chat function will remain open throughout, and our speakers may ask you to respond to some prompts throughout that by using that function. And we will be leaving time for questions after the talk. And we're asking that once we get into that space, you can write specific questions for our speakers utilizing the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And if you would prefer to vocalize the question yourself at that point, rather than have one of us read it out, please write Ask Live in the parentheses, and then we can unmute you so that you may submit your question. You may vocalize it. All right. So without any further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce today's two wonderful speakers and facilitators, Dr. Savannah Shange and Steph Hopkins. Dr. Savannah Shange is Associate Professor of Anthropology at UC Santa Cruz. I apologize for the typo on the flyer that said assistant, and also serves as Principal Faculty in Critical Race and Ethnic Studies. Her research interests include gentrification, multiracial coalition, ethnographic ethics, Black femgender, and abolition. She earned a PhD in Africana Studies and Education from the University of Pennsylvania, an MAT from Tufts University, and a BFA from Tisch School of the Arts at NYU. Her first book, Progressive Dystopia, Abolition, Anti-Blackness, and Schooling in San Francisco, was published by Duke University Press in 2019, and is an ethnography of the afterlife of slavery as lived in the Bay Area, and is also the winner of the Gregory Bateson Book Prize by the Society of Cultural Anthropology. Steph Hopkins is a Black Feminist Data Fellow with Movement for Black Lives Kitchen Table Fellowship, with a Bachelor of Science in Mathematical Decision Sciences from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and over 10 years of scientific research experience and over 5 years of abolitionist organizing experience. Steph is excited to collaborate with M4BL's APV table, or the Abolition Patriarchal Violence Table, and USC's Black Geographies Lab to determine and test metrics for abolition. Steph grew up in Delaware and spent most weekends between Philadelphia and rural Eastern Shore communities, and is now based out of North Carolina. Steph's organizing centers queer Black youth, education liberation, labor rights, and abolition frameworks. Everyone, please help me in welcoming Dr. Savannah Shange and Steph Hopkins.
Thank you for that incredible invitation and to be a part of the space, and also for that singular clap, Mesky. Can I just say it's so wonderful to be here with you. I'm sure folks who are on the call know, but if you don't, you are in the presence of absolute greatness with Dr. Meskedem Alexander. And I'm so great to be able to be in this space with you and see this incredible and really vibrant counterpublic that you've created in universities that aren't always the most hospitable places to do this kind of generative inquiry. So it's really amazing to see the way that you have crafted a space of refuge for those of us who want to do this kind of work. I'm also really grateful to be here with Steph. And this is kind of part of what we talked about, but we are here as part of an experiment ourselves. And so, yes, I am faculty at UC Santa Cruz in the anthropology department in the CREST formation. And I'm also a research lead for the Abolishing Patriarchal Violence Table and the Movement for Black Lives. So as opposed to a conventional research talk where, I come and, Mesky invited me to come and do a research talk. And I said, actually, my research right now looks a lot more like collaboration. And I've been honored to be that Steph has been willing to be in this experiment with me over this past year, along with 5 other fellows who are the inaugural cohort of Kitchen Table Fellows. We could talk more about the fellowship if folks want to know more kind of like nuts and bolts about how we set it up. In the short form, it's a funded year-long Black feminist fellowship that funds folks to do experiments towards abolition, right? And there's a lot of different experiments in different directions. And what we have here today is some of the products of our ongoing experiment that Steph and I have participated in. And I also, before I want to get started, just want to speak explicitly to the largest labor strike in US history in the higher education field. There are 48,000 striking graduate workers at the University of California system, of which I am a part. All of the work that I have been able to do, my ability to attain tenure, my ability to conduct the research that got me invited here has happened only with the support of graduate workers. I would not be the scholar that I am. I would not have the position that I am without their labor. I just want to explicitly state that I'm here in solidarity with them and encourage the University of California to negotiate with them and give them the $54,000 a year that they deserve. That having been said, I'm going to pass it to Steph.
Hi, thank you so much for the introduction, and of course, in solidarity with the graduate students in the UC graduate system. Again, my name is Steph, and I'm a Kitchen Table Fellow with the Movement for Black Lives, Abolishing Patriarchal Violence Table. And we want to start off today with doing a bit of a roll call. So if folks don't mind sharing your names, pronouns, your role at ASU or in the community, and if you will add one person you pick up the phone for, no matter what. And I'll model it off as folks put it in the chat. My name is Steph. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a guest speaker, a Kitchen Table Fellow, as I mentioned. And the one person who I will always pick up the phone for, no matter what, is my little sister. She's 16 years old. She's about to go to college soon. She actually calls me all the time, but that's one person who can count on me to answer the phone for her. And if folks want to start adding their names and pronouns to the chat.
And yeah, I'll encourage you. And I know this might be a little bit different, but we're really trying to, we come from a call and response tradition. Okay, this isn't just going to be, a show or there's something happening on stage. We really want to be able to bring in some of the ways of moving that happen within the Movement for Black Lives, which is an organization that's not an academic space, right? It's one where in order to get everyone bring something to the table. And so we encourage you to go ahead and drop that in. Also, just in general, if you have something you want to pop in there, using the chat space as like, I know that's right. That reminds me of X and Y. Feel free to put throw an emoji in there. This is a collaborative space, right? So I'll also go ahead and give my roll call again. Savannah Shange. I use a she, her series. Here, I'm the research lead for the Kitchen Table. I'm the research lead for the Kitchen Table Fellowship and for the Movement for Black Lives, Abolishing Patriarchal Violence Table. And I'm right there with you, Steph, my little sister, who is no longer 16, but she's always 16 in my heart. If she calls, if she FaceTimes me right now, I'm picking up. I'll pop that to Mesky, and then we'll hear from folks in the chat.
So as I said earlier, I'm Meskedem Gabregzaber Mesky, and I am Assistant Clinical Professor and Director for Inclusion here at ASU and mentor to many students. And the person that I sort of keeping with the theme here, the person that I always, no matter what, pick up the phone for, it would be my big sister. Do you want me to start calling out the people? Okay.
All right. Thank you all so much. It seems like y'all are coming from all over campus. We see some parents and partners and more family members, brothers and sisters and siblings, husbands and friends and colleagues. And so we want to keep these folks in our minds and our hearts as we go through some of this curriculum that we have today. And if you haven't gotten a chance to introduce yourself in the chat, please continue. And I encourage folks to read through them as we go through this introduction section. Thanks for joining us. So to get us started today, I wanted to share my experience with patriarchal violence. We'll go through a little bit of how we're defining patriarchal violence, but wanted to get us grounded in a real life example of moments that have led me to become an abolitionist, right? And so we've titled this as A Collision with the Collateral State. And also want to give a content warning. This story has a bit to do with confrontation with a state trooper, as well as incarceration in the carceral system. So in one moment, all my training was out the window. I was in crisis mode. What started as a calm response to an unfortunate accident turned into a year-long entanglement with the criminal justice system. It was April of 2020 on a cloudy, rainy day. I got in a single car accident from hydroplaning on a flooded patch of road. Car inoperable, me unscratched, no emergent damage to the wooded area nearby. I took a deep breath and started making my phone calls. My partner at the time, I called to pick me up. The insurance company, I called to send a tow. And my mama, because I was alive. It seemed like it happened all at once. My partner arrives, my insurance company is looking for me, my mom is on the other line, and State Trooper Wilson arrives at the scene. Still a little shaky from what I describe as a near-death experience. I honestly did not want to deal with Officer Wilson until I finished my phone calls. But he had an unwavering agenda to receive my information and file a report, which he informed me that I legally must complete. I gave him my information, and instead of simply filing a report on the accident, he added 2 additional charges against me. Fast forward maybe 30 minutes, and I'm handcuffed in a squad car and getting patched up by an EMS. To summarize, me and Wilson did not get along that day. Wilson knew everything about me: my name, my age, my height, my weight, contact information, home address, etc. And all I knew was his last name. The officers that took me to the county jail said they would speak on my behalf to get the charges dropped, because by this time I was charged with assaulting an officer. The officer in processing took my statement and assured me that he would file a report against Wilson, as at this point I was assaulted by Officer Wilson. Neither of these were successful, by the way. Now I'm sitting in jail alone with my thoughts, wondering how I got here, wondering if I shouldn't have asked the officer so many questions about the additional charges, wondering if I was the problem. I was in the waiting block, and pain from my bruises and wounds started to outweigh the adrenaline. At least I could make some phone calls. They gave me bologna and some bread and some milk. I hadn't eaten all day, so I gave it a try. When I finished, someone joined me in the waiting block and we talked some. She said, they always pick me up after 3 p.m. knowing the bailiff has left for the day and I have to spend the night in jail. I went home that night. I walked out of jail with my things in a Ziploc bag and was greeted by familiar faces, snacks, waters, flowers, and a wonderful group of friends and loves welcoming me home. My trial was set for August, then September, then January, then April of the next year. It didn't happen again, and didn't actually happen until the September of the following year. For me, out on bail meant walking on thin ice. After a year and a half, I had my trial and the case was dropped because Officer Wilson did not show up to court. This is what my lawyer was actually betting on. This is my reminder to know my rights as a point of escalation was me inquiring about the charges and the report process. That an officer of the state was able to assault me and face no reprimand, and the gratitude for my safety pods for keeping me safe. In a situation where I needed help, I called my partner and my mother. I also called the insurance company. While booked, my partner called organizations who may have bail and folks who may have a lawyer. When released, I called folks who might be able to help me pay for a lawyer. And I also called my mom again, who offered great counsel during this time of my life. My partner also called her networks to find out who the state trooper was, because at this time I was assaulted and the assaultant knew everything about me while I knew nothing about him. Groups of individuals I knew directly, organizations I was connected with, friends, family, local organizations, and my community kept me safe that day, not Officer Wilson. And so I share that story just to describe an experience with the carceral system and to also introduce particular buckets of patriarchal violence. And so I want to emphasize that there are particular organizations and individuals that supported me through this process. So you may see a story like this, and obviously there's a lot going on. In a way that we can understand the type of violence that showed up, and how can we understand types of violence that show up in moments like this? Through a series of questioning and evaluating our experiences, Savannah and I have thought through 7 buckets of patriarchal violence, which we wanted to dig deeper in. The 7 buckets are education, healthcare and medicine, policing/surveillance, domestic, sexual violence, labor and work, and housing. There are at least three facets of patriarchal violence that I can name in this specific story, and maybe there are others. So as an example, the patriarchal violence that occurred through not knowing my rights. It was a point of escalation because I was inquiring about the process of needing to file the report, the additional charges, and so which may have been solved by me actually knowing my rights, maybe through educational programs and things of that nature. Another piece was through surveillance, as the officer knew everything about my life, and also what I would describe as over-policed that particular situation. And then also an example of sexual violence, as officers are told to use their whole bodies to restrain folks who they're trying to arrest. And so that was just another experience in that one. And so, yeah, I encourage you to think through some of these buckets of patriarchal violence. I just pulled a couple from this specific story. Thanks for taking the time, for letting me share my story with y'all today. And I'll pass it to Savannah.
Thank you so much, Steph, for obviously giving us that framing, but also just for sharing your lived experience with us, right? Because a lot of times, on a day-to-day basis, we experience these systems, and one of the ways that we're taught to survive them is by filing it away. This is just normal. This is just normal. This is just what happens, right? But you taking a moment to actually share with us your experience and connecting it to these systems of power, as opposed to filing it away as just something that we have to put up with, is really an incredible gift. And yeah, I just want to appreciate that. One of the reasons we wanted to start here is because sometimes it can feel like, oh, policing and abolition is over there, right? And our everyday lives are over here, right? Over the years, for very good reason, we have seen communities rise up in response to spectacular media circulated instances of police murder and police brutality, right? And so I'm sure many of the folks here took action in this and during the uprisings of 2020, whether it was on campus, in community, online, right? In terms of thinking about the huge uprisings that came in the wake of the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, right? So we know that those forms of police violence are a huge problem, right? What we don't always know is thinking about how the folks who show up at the protest, who are out there, on the line as shutting down the police station, when those folks get home, right? Is there anyone there marching to keep them safe from the people in their houses who are supposed to love them, right? And so one of the things that came up, particularly in the summer 2020, is thinking about, yes, doing the work to make sure that Breonna Taylor's voice is put alongside of George Floyd, right? Then taking a step out to think about the, folks like Remy Fells, who were also killed in other instances of community-based violence, right? And then making the connections between those kinds of spectacular, meaning exceptional kinds of violence, with the kinds of violence we're looking at here. People getting suspended at school for dress code violations and that overly policing Black girls, right? Folks who are gender expansive, gender nonconforming, literally not being able to play sports or use the restroom in their own schools, right? What are the ways in which the daily kinds of violences are connected to the spectacular kinds of violences? And so that is how we got to this framing of patriarchal violence, right? Which is not to say this is different from policing, right? But really a way to take a step back and look at this larger frame to bring these kinds of analysis together so we can bring our resistance to them and our ways of combating them together. And so to give you some context, I want to take a step back to say, okay, this is not even, this conversation is part of a longer push that has produced what we call the Movement for Black Lives. So there's the Movement for Black Lives, the organization, right, which is one thing I'm about to give you a little history of. But of course, that's just one node in the lowercase, not .com, Movement for Black Lives has been ongoing for multiple centuries, right? And so M4BL as an organization is, this is a coalition of over 100 Black-led organizations that has two main ways of working. One, they implement strategies focused on advancing Black communities, right? And in doing that kind of advancement work, really prioritizing programming that's about advancing Black liberation, right? So that means in some ways doing a pull of both help strategically coordinate Black-led organizations across sectors, but also pulling them to a political program that's oriented around liberation as opposed to reform, right? And so I'm thinking about this in the context of Mike Brown's murder in 2014 was really the starting point that created what we now call M4BL. That fall in Cleveland, the first convening of the Movement for Black Lives was brought together in Cleveland. I was there as a member of BYP 100 at the time. There was 50 different organizations who were represented because folks said, okay, after the murder of Mike Brown, seeing folks rise up, seeing the incredibly harsh backlash that folks had to survive in Ferguson after that, there was a sense of, okay, we're in these different organizations, how can we work together? So those 50 organizations that came together first in 2014, then built more and more infrastructure, right? Built more and more funding so that when 2020 came, they were already grown to about 150 organizations and a really relatively large budget of being able to redistribute those funds across organizations and across programs. There's 5 major tenets that bring together the work that M4BL does. That say kind of, yes, there's lots of Black folks working on Black things. What are the ways we're working towards liberation? And there's 5 of them. First of all, as an ecosystem, right? So M4BL thinks of itself not as necessarily an organization or an institution, but an ecosystem, right? A space that sustains different forms and functions of Black life. First, we're abolitionists, right? That means that we know that policing, prisons, and probation are not part of how we're going to be free. Right. So that means everything from defund and also creating safety in ways that don't rely on police. Right. It means both destabilizing policing as harm, but also actually supporting the safety and needs of our folks. And the way that we do that is centering the most directly affected, from survivors, unhoused folks, Black immigrants, Black disabled folks. Right. Really thinking about how members of the Black community that are directly impacted can be both leaders, right, and really be the baseline for how we understand the impacts of the campaigns we're working on. Thinking about those campaigns, we believe in transformation and radical realignment of power, right? It means really thinking about what it means to not just respond to these kinds of injunctions that come time and time again, whether it's the fall of Roe, the pending end of affirmative action, which is going to impact all of us on our campuses, right, pretty soon. But how can we actually think beyond those kinds of reactionary moments, so we're not just ready to respond, but actually have our own plan that is longer term than the kind of obstacles right in front of us. In order to do that, we have to do that by organizing, right? Not just in organizing each other, but being an organization. How many folks here? I don't know. Can you all raise your hands? I can't tell. How many folks here have heard that Kwame Ture video when he said, "Join an organization," right? And the caveat is some organizations are trash. We get it. We know, right? However, that call to be with folks, right? Join an organization, which is not the same as start an organization. Okay, sometimes that needs to be done, but often what we can do is really lean into the work that's already being done and do that work together. Just like Mariame Kaba has told us, anything worth doing is worth doing together. Finally, just to name explicitly, M4BL as an ecosystem is anti-capitalist, right? We don't believe that Black capitalism is going to save us, and we don't think that we're going to be able, as communities, not just Black communities, as Black, as Brown, Indigenous, as folks across different spectrums of marginalization, capitalism isn't going to be able to hold us, right? And so the kind of overarching question that M4BL has asked is, what can we accomplish together as an ecosystem that we can't accomplish as our individual organizations, right? There's different folks from Black Visions in Minneapolis to I Am Negrix in upstate New York. Different folks are doing their different work and already holding it down. What can be done across those organizations that we can't do alone? And one of those things is, you know what we can't do as one organization? Abolish patriarchal violence, right? And so that is one of the places that the Abolishing Patriarchal Violence table came. And actually, I'm gonna take a step before I get into what the table is, just to give you a sense of how we got here. The M4BL ecosystem, right, has a bunch of different tables: electoral justice, mass engagement, organizing, right? Different tactics of thinking about how to work across all these organizations, right? In 2019, a group of folks came together and said, we have all of these folks who are interested in Black feminism, a lot of women and queer folks in leadership, right? However, we don't actually have a place in this ecosystem dedicated to manifesting Black feminist ideals, right? We don't have a place that helps us know that when we're doing electoral work, when we're doing organizing work, when we're doing comm strategy and mass engagement, are we doing that work in a way that destabilizes patriarchy and names that the problem is not just the state, right? And I'll speak for myself as a researcher. I'm not folks of, just on the academic side of things. In my own research, I have named abolition as the ways in which Black folks and our allies work within, against, and beyond the state in the service of collective liberation, right? So I wrote my first book. That's why I defined abolition. That's how I was working with it, right? In the years since I put that out, and since moving into this formation, it's been clear that we have a lot more than the state to abolish, right? So it's not just only that interface with the state, but to be very frank, sometimes the interface of abolition is our interface with each other, right? And how do we develop those skills? How do we bring our values to bear in a way that does not use the carceral values of disposability, and also does not silence, belittle, or decenter survivors, right? That's kind of the overall question. And so the Abolishing Patriarchal Violence table was born. It's about 13 different organizations across sectors, from a couple organizations that have $5 and $6 million budgets, like Black Feminist Future and Girls for Gender Equity, to small, all volunteer organizations like I Am Negrix, which is a Black Latinx survivors organization in upstate New York, to individual artists and filmmakers coming together to work on this project. And I share the mission just so you can know that we, as a group, are guided by radical Black feminist, abolitionists, and anti-capitalist politics, like the rest of the ecosystem. We're a survivor-centered project focused on healing, education, advancing interventions, leadership development, shifting culture, and power building to end patriarchal violence. Ooh, I like that. It sounds good, don't it? We're focused on building alternatives for future generations, and our goals are twofold, right? Both interrogating and disrupting the unchecked consequences caused by patriarchy and misogyny in our families, relationships, communities, and movements, right? And our vision is to end the epidemic legacy of patriarchal violence so that all Black people are able to thrive free from violence, right? That sounds good, right? It sounds good? It sounds good to you, Ms. Key? The only person I can see. Sounds good. And one of the first questions that this formation came to before I joined the table was, okay, by when, right? So if our vision is to abolish patriarchal violence, and we are folks, we come from research, we come from organizing, if this is a campaign, how long is it going to take, right? How do we know we're on track? And so one of our inspirations here is Gen 5 or Generation 5, if folks are familiar with that organization who works against childhood sexual violence. And Gen 5 put forth a vision of ending childhood sexual violence in all communities in 5 generations, right? So we really took that on and said, for us, what would it mean to abolish patriarchal violence in Black communities in 5 generations, right? So that would mean our grandchildren's grandchildren would have to be explained from scratch what rape was, right? If your great, 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 great grand niece, nephew, nibbling had to be like, excuse me, I'm sorry, what? My gender has something to do with my access to what now? Right? And so really, what does it mean to make that strange in that amount of time? And so I was asked to come on as the research lead when folks were like, okay, Savannah, you do research stuff. Can you help us develop something like a timeline, something like a measurement? Because folks had this vision. They said, okay, we're going to end patriarchal violence. What are our benchmarks? One person was like, okay, well, we're going to decrease patriarchal violence by 25% in 10 years. And another person was like, I'm sorry, 25%? That is wildly impossible. 25% in 10 years, 5% in 25 years. Another person was like, 5% in 25 years? Like, you're not going to inspire anybody like that. Another person said, well, 5% in 25 years would mean 10,000 Black children being safe, right? Is that not worth it, right? And so that's when I came into the conversation and folks were like, okay, can you give us a sense of what it might mean to know now that we are on track for setting in motion something that we're not going to survive to see, right? How do you know that you are on track for work that you know you don't even intend to make it to see, right? And one of our first tasks was really defining what is it that we mean by patriarchal violence. So that was one of the pieces that we came up with this year. And this was not just me and Seth. We worked with the overall table, all of the fellows, all the members of the table really struggled through this definition to get to this definition of patriarchal violence. I've been talking a lot of Steph. Steph, you want to read this for us?
So patriarchal violence is a massive sticky web of abusive behaviors, policies, narratives, practices, and beliefs that traps our freedoms and ability to live in safety. It is demonstrated, it is demonstrated through police violence, intimate partner violence, institutional violence, gendered poverty, and state-sanctioned violence. Patriarchal violence attacks Black women, children, queer people, and gender-expansive people in our bodies, our homes, and at work.
Ashay, thank you for that. For folks who are reading this and listening to this, I know we've been talking for a second. I'm going to ask you, can you just drop in the chat any of the words or phrases from this that stick out to you or that are landing with you? Because this is actually our first time sharing this definition in a community space. And so, we're right. You're with it. This isn't research results. This is research process, right? This is where we've gotten to. So it'd be great just to hear how folks are kind of hearing sticky, the massiveness, the stickiness. Thank you, Ona, thinking about bodies, homes, and work. The stickiness really came out of a conversation where folks were like, okay, how can we make this not just facts and figures, right? If we're thinking about patriarchy as a spider, right? It's not just one thing, right? And it has the capacity to kind of really embed itself. And so we appreciate you kind of thinking about this. And we had to, we had a lot of different, it was going to be a wave, it was an ocean, right? So I appreciate hearing you all, how this is vibrating with you, because it's also something we want to make sure that the whole ecosystem has access to, right? So when folks are doing work on electoral justice, when folks are doing work on communication strategy around reproductive justice, that we're developing a shared and not constant or final definition, but that just we have something to struggle with together in what Tanya Lee calls principled struggle, right? Where the aspiration is not to be on the same page or to always be in consensus, but to really bring our values to bear in the ways that we struggle about what's important to us. And so part of where this came, so the first ask from the table was, okay, can you just get us on the same page about what patriarchal violence is? This is what we came to, right? The second piece was really around, okay, getting back to that question of what does it mean to measure safety, right? Where are we at? And so one of the pieces that Steph and I have been working on over this past year is something we're calling Black Feminist Data Dreaming. And this is a movement-funded collaboration, which means it's not Ford, it's not Soros, right? This is our money. This is the people's money. And that means something, right? Because this isn't necessarily something that's going to show up on my CV, right? This is something that has been asked for by movement. And for those of us who are faculty here and graduate students, and then we can talk about this more in Q&A, often we're doing work because we need to do it for work, right? We have to publish in order to get tenure. We have to publish in order to graduate. We have to publish in order to get raises, right? And sometimes you can go to community and say, hey, I need to get tenure. Can you help me, right? Sometimes that also can mean that the academy is dictating our research priorities, right? Which isn't to say that that kind of work isn't useful, but just it is different for me. And I want to make sure we're naming that this is a project that has its impetus in movement, right? And it's funded. And so it's a collaboration between Gen Forward, which is a formation at University of Chicago, which is headed up by the divine, inimitable Kathy Cohen, who gave us Punks, Bull Daggers, and Welfare Queens and 30 years of incredible Black feminist theory, and the APV table at N4BL, right? And so part of what we're doing is thinking about how do we bring together both state authorized data. So this is information from the Bureau of Prisons, information from hospitals, information from the Officer Wilsons of the world, right? Who know everything about us, right? How do we take their data and the people's data, right? The kind of data we get by talking to one another, the kind of data we get from the deep kind of ethnographic grounded research that I know folks in this room have been doing. How do we bring those together to map out Black people's lived experiences of patriarchal violence, right? So that the kinds of experiences that Steph talked about at the beginning of this talk aren't just marked off as normal, but actually can be thought of as a data corpus, right? And one of the goals of doing this is bringing together this kind of the nature of both how we're experiencing patriarchal violence and how we are resisting it. What are the ways that everyday folks are already solving problems without the police? What are the ways that everyday folks are already escaping harmful relationships, right? What are the ways that everyday folks are defending their own right to gender expression, right? What are those strategies? And how can we really amplify those in a way that we can be able to shift narratives, shape attitudes, and inform political and organizing strategy about patriarchal violence? And our next, what we came to is we're in the process of developing a national abolition survey, which will bring together kind of a large survey platform of 3,000 Black people across the US in a gold standard randomized format. And that's really coming from the Gen Forward side. They had the expertise in public surveys with a targeted survey of the members of these activist organizations that create N4BL, right? So a survey that looks at both folks who are in movement, right, and folks who are in community and seeing how can we think across this boundary to address these issues. In terms of method, this means also developing a community-based, community accountable method. Because we want this project to be both responsive and accountable to the ongoing work of two different groups of people, the organizers, right, who have been moving on the ground to shift conditions, and the scholars who have given us generations, right, of expertise around this. And so part of how we've started as this collaborative is through the collective deep Black study, right? So we're reading stuff together, we're bringing in experts who have researched patriarchal violence, and we're looking at models for other kinds of surveys who have done this kind of work, right? So we're not starting from scratch, right? We're not trying to be like, well, we're gonna be the best. No, we're going to build on folks who have already laid the groundwork. So for instance, Beth Ritchie and Donayne Davis have given us work on gender-based violence that really has allowed us to make these critiques of abolitionist feminism, of carceral feminism. So for instance, folks might be familiar with the Violence Against Women Act, which was certified in 1996. It was recertified and more recently that in some ways gives the most funding to stop domestic violence and to actually do rape crisis work that has ever been funded. And by doing so, also criminalizes members of our communities, right? So Davis's work and Richie's work really helps us unhook this idea of what it means to like fund and prioritize survivor-based work from that being criminalization, right? Juan Battle and Jaime Grant, Juan Battle and Jamie Grant worked on large-scale surveys that kind of give us the framework for what this might look like. Juan Battle's Say It Loud survey, which was the first comprehensive survey of Black LGBTQ people in the US. And then Jamie Grant was the lead for the National Transgender Discrimination Survey, which created the first corpus of data to really say, what are trans folks up against, right? Across all these different sectors. So we're really trying to learn from them and their methodologies so that we can build from there. And I'll pass it to Steph to talk more about what our study has looked like.
Thanks so much for the introduction on the study. In addition to Kathy Cohen at Gen Forward, I also like to thank Gabby Bozarth, Luna Vincent, and Jonathan Likes for being fundamental in our initial development of this project. I want to take y'all a little bit into some of the preparation we did to get into this. It's actually going to be an ongoing learning opportunity as we work through this study. And so we read a few books. And I named a few here, one of them being Arrested Justice, Black Women, Violence, America's Prison Nation by Beth Ritchie. And so this really describes how intersectionality of being Black and a woman and the different types of interlocking oppressions create a experience of gendered violence in a unique way for Black women in America. We also read through Black Women, Battered Black Women and Welfare Reform, Between a Rock and a Hard Place by Donna A. Davis. Through a collection of interviews, Donna was able to describe how Black women and other women experience government programs such as welfare and public housing that perpetuate violence and a social divide. Another book we read through was No More Police, A Case for Abolition by Andrea Ritchie and Miriam Kaba. And so this is just a great case for abolition, walking us through some social movements and work from on-the-ground organizers, and also includes like a really great forward by Black Visions out of Minneapolis in response to George Floyd. So the last book we read through was Dark Matter on Surveillance of Blackness by Simone Brown. And so this really connects us with the concepts of historical and contemporary surveillance on Black people and how these dangerous motivations have really created structural and social infrastructure of surveillance on Black people and violence against Black people. And so just wanted to name a few books that we've read and encourage you all to look through these books as well as you deepen your study of abolition and Black feminism. Thank you.
So now we're actually going to move into the workshop portion. So I would encourage everyone to just shake whatever you can, shake your head, shake your hand, move your shoulders around. I know we can't see you, but this is your accountability. Just do it, wiggle your finger. Remember that you have a body, you're not a brain on a stick, right? And we're gonna take a moment now to do a few minutes of free writing. So please grab either a pen and pencil, open the notes app on your phone, open a little sticky, right? I'm gonna play a couple minutes of music. And this is the question. The question is, how do you know when you are safe? What people, places, or sensations do you connect to safety? We're gonna take about 3 minutes to reflect on that. Yeah, we will be right back. Little throwback for you. You had to be there. Take about 1 more minute. All right, as folks are finishing up, we're actually going to try something a little bit different for the way that we interact with this next piece. I'm going to ask folks to go ahead and use the link that you see in the chat here to go to this Menti and type in some element of what you reflected on. It's okay if you don't, it will be not connected to your name, it'll be anonymous. If you could drop that into this Menti, you can either just click the link or go to menti.com and use that code that is right next to you. Make sure that it's open for you. Okay, so go ahead and get started. Let me know if you have any trouble with that. Take about another minute to allow folks time to drop that in. Oh, wait, sorry, y'all, my music is continuing, my bad. And so what we see here from folks is, I cannot see there we ooh, I'm smelling grandma's fresh baked cookies. Ooh, holding hands in public. When your stomach relaxes and stops hurting, I can bring that in right now. When I am safe, when I feel safe are different. Ooh, speak to it, right? The lived experience of safety, especially for those of us who have an experience of trauma, right? We may not always be able to land into when we are safe, when we feel safe, and always gonna be the same. Respecting consent, absolutely. Being able to jaywalk, cut across a lawn, have mobility without fear, being calm, being around friends and family, right? Being surrounded by friends and partners. being fully present and not hyper vigilant about my surroundings. I just need to give some snaps to that. Steph, feel free to lift up some too if you want to hear.
Other queer and trans people in my religious community, compassion, understanding, the construction workers who guide traffic.
Yes.
Yes. Also cat petting and purring, taking the time to cut fruit. That can be very relaxing, yes, and offer safety for me as well. At home with my blankets, yes, especially my weighted blanket. I definitely resonate with that. And deep breaths and sighs, yes, and not sighs.
Ashe, thank you all so much for landing in that. And from that experience, that lived experience of safety, just go on ahead and feel that and hold on to that as we pass it on to Steph to lead us through the next section of the workshop.
All right, y'all. So safety is a reoccurring theme in this workshop. And also folks that we can call on, right? So we introduced who can count on us, right? And now we really want to dive into who we can count on. And so I want to introduce some of y'all to a concept of pod mapping. If folks have already used pod mapping or know what it is, go ahead and drop that in the chat. Be like, oh yeah, I've used pod mapping or I've heard of it before. But I'm going to talk a little bit about it, and then we'll get some experience with actually creating a pod map together, right? And we wanted to make sure that we offer not only this research explanation of what we're working on, but also a tool that you can walk away with today. Yep, exactly. And you should have received some of this information in an email, and Anna had dropped in the chat about the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective. Yes, we'll definitely, and Mia Minkus, we'll definitely talk about that. And so this curriculum comes out of a history of folks interested in creating a map of intimate networks that we can call on when we experience, witness, or cause violence, harm, or abuse. The term pod started being used by the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective, BATJC, which was dropped in the chat in 2014, to describe the kind of relationship between people who would turn to each other for support. These folks may come from people you understand to be family, friends, or community, and also a broader network of folks you already have or will establish trust with. The goal is to understand where we have connections and where we can nourish connections in service of immediate and ongoing safety, accountability and transformation of behaviors, and individual or collective healing and resiliency. So in my beginning story, you may have noticed how I called on a bunch of people to help me in this particular situation. I wanted to offer you all an example where I was already prepared. I'm sorry, that was a response to a crisis. I wanted to offer an example on where I was able to prepare beforehand a pod map. And so this is how I've used the pod map in the past. Again, in 2020, there was a large abolitionist rally in Durham where I spoke in front of folks gathered in opposition of police violence against George Floyd, Sandra Bland, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, ourselves, and our loved ones. Because we knew that there would be police presence at this rally, which we estimated would gather thousands of people from and around Durham, our organization established a system in the case we experienced or witnessed confrontation from the police. I began to fill out my pod map where I write my name in the middle. And if y'all look at the screen, you'll see an example of my pod map. On the first set of circles, I wrote the names of 3 confirmed police liaisons and 5 legal observers that were volunteering for the march. These are people I would call on in the case of police interactions. And these are also people that have been designated to interact with the police on my behalf. Outside of that, I wrote the names of folks who I knew would be in the area, whether it be for my organization, my neighbors, or my friends who came to join us during the rally. These are folks that I'm familiar with and have a relationship with, but could have more intentional conversations with about how we show up for each other if confronted by the police. On the outside circles, I wrote the names of organizations that I would call on who may support us in the case of police intervention, such as our National Black Youth Project 100 Healing and Safety Team, a local bailout organization, and local lawyers guild. These are folks or programs or resources who are aimed to support folks who may be confronted by the police. I'll give you a chance to look kind of at mine. You'll see very specific names, and then I also added some other general things, like maybe your neighborhood faith-based organization, maybe a journalist group chat, other national or local organizations, right? It could be your roommate, your neighbor, your family member, and things of that nature. So now that you saw an example of a pod map, now it's your turn. We'll offer you a scenario to complete the pod map using the handout provided. So you all should have received a handout via email that's fillable. If you don't have access to it now, maybe you have a piece of paper. You can kind of like draw the circles or kind of write lines for your different tiers of pod mapping. And for those, it's kind of hard to see, but the center circle, which is colored, is me. The solid lines on the outside is my first tier. The dotted lines outside of that, the circles with dotted lines outside of that is my second tier. And then the solid lines again in a lighter color, the larger circles are my third tier. All right, so I want to offer this scenario for y'all to think through who you may call on. So today's prompt is, you notice a group of anti-Black protesters are agitating Black students for posting outreach signs for an upcoming campus meeting. Who will you call on?
And we have 10 minutes here, but we're going to try to just do it, given that, time, it's in motion. We'll try to give it about 6 minutes, 5 or 6 minutes, just and see how far we get.